And welcome to a special edition of Creatives Chat. I'm Rusty.
I'm Peter.
And tonight we have a very special edition where we're going to invite some members of our community to join us on a panel to discuss some pretty sensitive and, I would say, relevant issues. So Peter, tell our viewers what to expect this evening from our show.
Oh, Rusty, we're going to be having a Creatives Chat First community panel. Now, I'm going to be the moderator. Each guest is going to have 3 minutes, 33 seconds to talk about whatever subject is really on the docket. And we're just going to continue this conversation organically and really establish a civil political discourse to not only inspire people, but to break down those walls of division. And as always, to serve as some educational material so we can really inform voters, we can inform ourselves as human beings, but most importantly, so we can have some more audience participation. So if you have a question that comes up in your head and you want to ask us, we'll add it to our list of subjects to talk about, and you'll participate in this community panel yourself.
So have a great show, everybody. Meet your community.
And welcome everyone to a Creative Chat First. It's our community panel. And I just want to say thank you for joining us this evening. I know the debate's going on, but this is some less obviously chaotic discourse that's going to happen here. So we're just hanging out. We're going to enjoy some political times. And really just want to introduce my panel. We have Chase, Elijah, Nick, and Zach. Just want to thank you guys for joining us this evening. And really, let's just dive into it. So I think one of the biggest stories that we've seen kind of drop, and it's going to be a topic later on, is this Hunter Biden email scandal. But we haven't seen a peep of it really getting addressed in the mainstream media. And we got to think, this is also kind of collecting into all of the censorship we've seen on the right, or any really voice that's not the mainstream establishment ideology. So I'm just curious, how do you guys feel about the media censorship, and I guess you'd almost say establishment networks? So why don't we start off with Mr. Chase? What are your thoughts on censorship and everything going on right now?
So hello, Peter. Thank you for prompting me. I'm glad to be here. So what I'll say about censorship is, fuck it. Censorship is not helping anybody. It's not doing anything. It removes any creative discussion or creative thoughts from discussion in any situation, no matter what it is. I mean, YouTube censors creators if they say the wrong thing. The media, censors different viewpoints depending on what side you're going to watch. And then I know it's a topic for later, but depending on like international markets or who you're dealing with, you're going to have to censor yourself to cater to that market, depending on like if it's here in America, or say if you're going to sell your product in China or something, you got to be careful. Like you see the NBA players getting censored for saying certain things, like standing with Hong Kong, or like the Star Wars movies, they change the posters and stuff to not have Finn as present because he's black, and in China, like they don't want that. That's like a real thing. And so when it comes down to it, I feel like censorship is basically just the removal of any free thinking of a topic or whatever, right? So when you're censoring somebody, you're essentially saying either your ideas are too powerful and we have to silence you, or your ideas could provoke controversy and we don't want any controversy. We want smooth-brained people walking around just being told what to say. So I yield after that. That is my stance on censorship.
Oh man, I love it. That was brilliant. And it's great considering you talked about, even just like the self-censorship that happens. So following up with that, Elijah, what are your thoughts on censorship and its kind of role in society right now?
Yeah, thank you. Again, yeah, also great to be here. Hard to follow that though. I actually agree with that completely. I think censorship is not only damaging to the discourse, but it's dangerous. And what we're seeing now is, instead of a totalitarian government censoring very actively, we have a capitalistic censorship where they're connected to the government and their agendas, and they want certain people to be in power. So they control the media, so they control the information. It's not journalism. Journalism at its core is presenting the information to the public so they can analyze it and make up their own minds. But we're not getting that. the story about Hunter Biden. I saw you post about it on Facebook, and the only thing I could find was a Fox News story. And that was very eye-opening to me because I would not go to Fox News first off the bat. But I was basically sitting there like, okay, like this is clearly a story. Like there's clearly some information here that needs to be told. But the quote unquote mainstream media journalists are not reporting on it. And it's a clear bias of political agendas, and they're trying to save the Biden campaign at this very crucial point, which, I mean, it's a good move, but it's pretty bullshit journalism. Yeah, and yeah, I have nothing really to rebuke there. That was beautifully put.
Oh man, I'm loving this already. It's haymaker after haymaker. And I guess the cool thing that you touched on is the fact that you haven't really seen the story anywhere thus far. And I think that's something that's really important to note on, because we are seeing a lot of the censorship with, in this case, with the Hunter Biden email stuff with Twitter. I think it was, one of the first people to get censored on this was actually the White House.gov sites itself. In addition to that, it was also the New York Post getting shut down. And I think that's been a top 10 newspaper and news outlet for the past 40 years. Oh man, I mean, these are great points. And the reason why I love this conversation is because this is a wide scope of individuals that all have varying walks of life. So for our listeners, we're all really kind of pseudo independent people politically. So let's just keep the ball rolling. I know Nick's got a lot to say about censorship. What are your thoughts on the current climate?
I support censorship for sure. I think that companies should have the right to censor. Like ABC should have the right to not say anything about the Biden story, and Facebook, same thing. They should be able to censor. Like, we just need to get a different Facebook that doesn't censor. Like, we should all leave Facebook and transport all of our things to a new thing. Yeah. I have some notes. Let me see what else. Unless the government funding goes to ABC, then, and we know from Operation Mockingbird that it does. Look up Operation Mockingbird if you don't know what that is. It's like a official government news propaganda program. And but we shouldn't have any government funding going to Facebook or any government funding going to ABC. That's my piece. So I support censorship. We should just get a different YouTube if YouTube is being terrible, and they are.
See, that's an interesting take. I'm curious, does anyone want to kind of rebuke that fact, or anyone kind of going to go against that statement at all? Yeah, Chase, floor is yours, man.
So that was actually a really interesting take on that. I really liked a lot of that. Just coming out of the gate just with, oh yeah, censorship is okay, but then turning it around to, so if you're not okay with these guys, then start your own company that does this. And I fully agree with that. I mean, it's up to the companies if they want to censor you and push their own, narrative or agenda or whatever they want to do. And then at that point, it falls on us to find a new platform where ideas can be discussed freely without that fear of censorship or anything like that. So I feel like that was a very interesting take on it, Nick. I appreciated that.
Thank you.
So, Zach, your thoughts on censorship in any of the comments thus far?
Honestly, I think they're right on cue. I fall in line with what has already been said. You know me, Peter. I am one for a logical argument. I don't listen to any left or right media per se. I do my own research, and I think we had some logical facts in here. So, cool.
Okay. I love it, man. Well, I guess the one thing that kind of comes to mind with the comment on being allowed to censor is the fact that, a lot of these companies and media outlets are under that 230B protection. And I know that's one of those concepts that's going to be really put into play soon in terms of adjusting it, because these companies are so large and there's so many people involved that it almost becomes its own kind of like town square or town hall. And they technically, by the structure of them, shouldn't be allowed to censor, but the fact that they are a private business, that's their loophole legality wise to censor.
And this has been my own experience largely, is that communicating over social media is just largely ineffective because just in the short time that we've been in this video call, the conversations I've had here and have heard, people saying things have been more productive than my whole time on Facebook. And I think the issue with Facebook and Twitter, any social media, and along that same line, the censorship that can happen there is that, you're not, there's this feeling of that you're not interacting with an actual person. So you're not actually listening. You're just saying what's on your mind, putting it out into the ethos, and then you're reacting to what's coming back at you instead of actually trying to digest the information and see it as a real argument. You're just, there's all these opinions flying around. People get very enthusiastic, if you will, and it's all about winning the argument versus just trying to figure out what the truth is and trying to converse over an idea. I have had more productive conversations on Facebook, I would say, but still, I feel like largely the interactions are, you've taken your stance in the debate and you're reacting and defending versus, oh, let's explore this idea. It's an impersonal conversation that's happening, and it's under the guise of like a personal connection because it's Facebook. We put your little picture up there and your name's there, and you're friends with people, but it's very impersonal.
Whew, bringing the heater. No, that was excellent. Who would like to expand upon that commentary or provide some of their own experience? Still, Zach, you up?
Yeah, I'll expand
Love
on
it.
that a little bit. So I'll touch more about this when I talk about education, but I think the social dilemma really brought to light the power of individuality and individualism. There's a doctor, his name is James G., and he talks a lot about gamification and the developing of our persona. When we are online, we get to create these personas we see through Facebook. Oftentimes, they are not a whole reflection of ourselves, but they can also overtake us. And one thing I found really interesting about the social dilemma is the fact that we are kind of being played and moved and targeted as to just always disagree. There was a concept in the documentary that said, depending on where you are in the world, your results will be different. I identify as primarily Democratic. I'm fairly left-leaning. And my news feed is flooded with smear campaigns about Trump and people on my timeline just backing the most ludicrous things that aren't rooted in any research. And I find that very interesting because it just fuels hate and makes us divide each other even more. And there's no kind of common ground. To find that common ground, you really have to dig deep and do your own research. And it's so much easier to click a link than to Google something yourself or just to copy and paste what someone's already posted. And I guess just further on that, and from a psychology standpoint, when we kind of ostracize ourselves and break away from our community, if it's our Facebook community, if it's our friends and family, we don't identify from what they're thinking, we get ostracized. There was a study in 2016 that said we are the most divided we've ever been, and that's continuing to move in that direction, especially with the Trump campaign and what the Obamas did in 2016. And I think it's really kind of sobering and kind of scary to see that, like, what social media has done and what it continues to do, even when people embody that persona that they put out, like, I'm super against the left or I'm super against the right, that we see can turn to violence very quickly. And it's a really kind of sobering, dangerous world we're in right now. It's a great documentary if you haven't seen it, very thought-provoking. Also look up Dr. James G. on persona and identity development. So, cool.
Oh, perfect, right on time. I think that was a brilliant addition to the conversation. I think that's really important to understand that concept of division and the kind of just rabbit hole that people dive into. So between Nick and Chase, I know Nick can post some quote unquote controversial stuff to mainstream social media. So what would be your thoughts? We'll jump to you first. We'll have Chase close out with this one. But what is your thoughts on kind of the social media change of political discourse and how it's kind of just impacted the psyche and that civil conversation?
Well, I saw that movie, Social Dilemma. I thought it was interesting. I wrote like a paper about it, like a response to it, just as I was watching it, and yeah, it was. I mean, I have some criticism, like the Pizzagate stuff. Like, listen to what they said about Pizzagate in that movie. It's like a one sentence, like brush off. They don't talk about the uh, pizzas, the pizza place's symbol and the FBI symbol, and how they're the exact same. Um, but I wanted to talk about what Elijah said about how, and kind of what Zach said about how we're so divided. And Elijah said we don't have to listen to people. And I feel like that's so true. Like, we don't have to listen to our partners, like our life partners. Like, we can be completely separate, like politically and like religious wise. And like, same with our parents. Like, it used to be not like that. And yeah, and like, we don't have to listen to the media because we know they lie. And so it's like, we don't, it's, there's a lot of not listening because there's a lot of not trusting, and same with the political class. And to fix that, we need to make politics as popular as football used to be. The end.
The end, the mic drop. That's a very interesting perspective on it. I kind of want to challenge you really quick because you still have some time on the clock for yours. How would one make politics more popular than football? Like, how do we make it something mainstream and approachable and not as, I guess you'd say, not as polarized or as hostile?
Well, it's hard to make it not hostile right now because we are very divided on like big issues. But to make it more like popular, like football, we just need to have celebrities and just a change of like our, like, it would be nice if the media helped and like celebrities and everyone who has a microphone in front of them to just say that we want to care about politics more. I don't know. We have a lot of people who care about reality TV, and I care about things like video games that people probably say it's kind of a waste of time. But I do care about politics and I follow politics. So we just need everyone to care about it and follow it. And then I think the truth would come out if everyone knew more about it.
Okay. Okay. I feel about that. We got to change the culture and change the dynamics itself. So let's conclude with the social dilemma kind of civil discourse aspect with Mr. Chase. What's your idea and ideology and kind of perspective with all this stuff?
For sure, yeah. I mean, following everybody up on that one, lots of good points were made there. So I've also seen that documentary too. It was like a year ago, but whenever it came out. So my thing on this whole topic is with people not being able to communicate to one another. My thing is, what happens, you go in, you start saying some ideas, you find people that have the same ideas as you, and then that perpetuates. And then on the note of censorship too, on the other hand, you have algorithms which are going to suggest to you ideas that are like your own. So like if you go on YouTube or Facebook or Instagram and you like certain pages or certain videos or anything like that, it's going to perpetuate more of that like-minded stuff to you, and you're not going to see the other side. So what's happening is essentially you get stuck in a mind prison where the companies or the social medias that you're using, that you might think, okay, cool, like I'm having original ideas, I'm finding new stuff, but in reality it's only showing you one side of the story and you're not getting the other side. So I mean, at this point it's really just a battle for truth. Like people hate hearing the truth, and so I mean, one of my favorite things to do is like, if you tell someone the truth and you see, how they react or how emotional they get about it, that's truly a gauge of where someone's at on the woke scale, so to say. Because right now there's a whole thing of like fake wokeness going on where you think you're like, oh, I know this stuff. Yeah, like stay woke. And then like the actual truth about something comes out, you know, whether it's right or left, someone will be like, oh, what? Like that hurts my feelings. I don't like that. I'm going to say that's not true because I don't like the way that makes me feel. And so like for me on a lot of this stuff, the biggest key is you have to remove your emotions from a lot of it and think about it with your brain, right? So that's not saying to be a cold-hearted person at all. That's just saying when it comes down to factual things that are just straight up, you can look into it, there's an answer on it, and here's what happened and here's why. You have to not cloud your own judgment with your own preconceived notions of anything or any views that you might hold. So that's my point on that. And it just makes it difficult for anybody to have an open, honest conversation because everybody just, the trail divides and then you just keep going and going and going and it never meets back up again.
I love that. I love that analogy too, because it really is just so, it's the perfect metaphor for what we are doing to ourselves. I mean, again, like you can think of all the different methods and aspects of just society, spiritually, politically, just physically. We're just kind of off the mark right now, which I guess is that true definition of sin if we want to go way back into linguistic terms. Now, I think this is actually kind of the perfect transition. This is a good opportunity just to kind of really express to the viewers and listeners how it's kind of impacted your perspective of the administration and everything going on. So Elijah, you're up. Yep.
Yeah, I can go. You know, I think during the initial stages of it, my view, it wasn't really tainted because my view was, I definitely lean left, I'll just say that. But then near, you know, when we started to figure out that it was just fabricated, you know, and this is why I classify as independent now. I have been for a while, but the DNC is just so disappointing in several aspects. But you know, it's just another case of them trying to manipulate the system. And you know, for a lot of younger voters who lean left as well, they did the same thing to Bernie. They had a great shot to change things up, and they chose not to. And they had another shot this time, and they didn't as well. And I think they have proven time and time again that they're just trying to manipulate the system, keep the status quo. And I'm not as knowledgeable about the scandal as you know, the rest of you may be, but it really didn't taint my view of the Trump administration as much as it did the DNC. And yeah, I guess that's all I have to say.
Hey, that's an honest perspective, and I think that's a great point to kind of touch on is what you're talking about in terms of the fact that DNC has already screwed people over. Because we'll get into stuff in terms of like our political leanings and where we're going to dive into that in a little bit later. But Chase, I'm curious, what are some of your thoughts on the whole Russiagate and the Russia collusion hoax? Which again, like just to remind the listeners, this led to like an impeachment. This led to, again, like millions of dollars of our tax-paying money just down the drain in something that they knew was fake from the start. So
I mean, yeah. So yeah, there's a few things to say about this one, but I mean, for allegedly wanting to take guns away, Democrats in this situation or any situation sure like to shoot themselves in the foot whenever they can. So what they did, I mean, they knew it was fake, and I'm not saying that Russia, here's the thing. If Russia did interfere in the election, we wouldn't know about it because they have intelligence agencies that would interfere in the election and we wouldn't know about it. It's simple as that. If the CIA, like we know the CIA does shady shit overseas, you think that the Russian special forces aren't doing crazy shit internationally on, like, come on. So if it did happen, it wouldn't be that simple to find. Like you literally have like a coup essentially on our hands, and that would be a whole other thing from within. I mean, it wouldn't be a coup necessarily, but if it was internal, you know, semantics here. But yeah, and then the government takes our money and pisses it away, just allegedly, like those hookers did in Donald Trump in his hotel room. And so next thing you know, now we're wasting our money, we're wasting our time. And so like there's so many other things that could have been done in this situation. Like I have no problem with holding people accountable for their actions if you know that they're true. But if you're just trying to pull this political stunt and grasping for straws and then wasting any money that you can on all this, which the government does plenty of, It pisses me off. So really in this situation, my main thing is I just lost more faith in the government than I had, not even left or right, just as a whole. I'm just like, all right, great. There goes our more of our money that we're never going to pay back.
Bringing the heat. No, I love that. And it's funny that you say that because again, like this whole thing started as to kind of get the heat away from the Hillary Clinton email scandal, which was flat out like everyone knows that was illegal. You can't destroy evidence. And the fact is, hey, you got subpoenaed, and they went ahead and like hammered and literally destroyed hard drives. Like, sorry, we don't got it.
Poured bleach on them. Just gotta say they poured bleach on the hard drive.
Right? Like that shows like there was a lot more nefarious stuff at foot. And I posted this in our chat, and I also posted this a link for the listeners. It's a documentary I actually just finished watching shortly before this, The Plot Against the President. It's actually very well done. It's on Amazon Prime. Chatted with Rusty a little bit in the green room. I kind of want to get a watch party for it. So if people don't have Prime, it's something that we could all watch together. And some kind of a setup like this, just to kind of really show people. It was a very well documentary in terms of like how this stuff actually happened and what went down involving all of it and all the different moving pieces. And essentially the biggest takeaway is we got lied to, and they pushed propaganda on the mainstream television for division. And then behind closed doors, when they were actually in their legal testimonies, they told the truth. And it was 180 degrees opposite of what was actually portrayed in the media. But you said something really important that I think is just, it's lining up perfectly with our next topic, how when there is something wrong, it does warrant investigation. And with this latest Hunter Biden, like, if you look at the hard drives that's been revealed, you look at the collaborators, and like we have Tony Bobolinsky, he's a Navy veteran, a military family, institutional investor for like international different like organizations and stuff. He's actually a Democratic Party member, which is always interesting to me. And text messages just came out on top of his like public statement on it. Again, this is his legal thing, getting ahead of the storm, where he confirmed that all this stuff is real. But his text messages actually advised against making deals with China and doing their like, hey, you get 10 million, like they pay us $10 million, they get to go meet the big man, which is Joe Biden. And the fact that he came out with this, and again, we're not seeing anything. Do you guys think Joe Biden should be under investigation and step down? Because I mean, like, this is like straight up selling the country for, he was selling meetings to different Chinese organizations and different firms in Ukraine all over the world, really, and selling his time as vice presidency as something to capitalize on. And to see this all getting axed from the media, and it's getting like essentially scrubbed from the internet, unless it's some independent or right-leaning source, like the mainstream media is not talking about it. I actually saw an article from NPR that said why we're not actually talking about this and why this isn't important. So I'm just curious, who thinks if Joe Biden should step down or not, and what do you think is going to be like the fallout of that if it goes down?
I mean, do I think he should step down? I thought he should step down months ago. I don't think it's going to happen now because the DNC has already invested themselves in this like shell of a man to be the president. I think that who can say what's going to happen now, but it's definitely bad for them. And once again, it was their fault. Like, they have the power to change the status quo. They can change the landscape, but they're not the party that they have sort of essentially brainwashed a lot of the left to believe that they are. They're not these people that are as progressive as they sell themselves to be. And as far as this goes, I can't really speak too much to it, other than the fact that, I mean, he should step down, but he's not going to. And it's a bad political move at this point, But yeah, again, I think he shouldn't have even been in the running. So
I agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Zach, what you got to say?
There's the unmute button. So being more left-leaning, I don't think Joe Biden is the best candidate to run in general. However, I am educated enough to say that while I have sniffed around this topic and read about it, to me, it is very troubling to know that is truthful. I think the facts are there that point to Joe Biden, the Biden campaign as being corrupt. Do I think he should step down? To me, I think I would say it depends on the day you ask me. Today, I think he doesn't have a choice. I think the Democratic Party is not as progressive as we're led to believe. There's a lot of false information out there, and yeah, I would say I don't think he's going to. I think he's backed into a corner. The election is 2.5 weeks away, so I'm stuck. I'm stuck on this one. It's definitely it swings my vote more than it has before. I have my ballot sitting on the table right now, so I think I don't know. I have to really reflect on it. So I'll pass my time for this one as well. But I think it's a shitty thing that came out. So
No, dude, that's a beautiful answer. And it's the honesty that we really value here at Creative Chat, because I think a lot of people are in that boat, man. It's shifting a lot of people's vote right now. And I think, again, like, I think it's kind of shitty that it's the political thing where it's like they've clearly had it way longer than this past like 2 weeks. And for them to drop it in front of like right before the election, like, I get it strategy wise. I still don't think it's the most honest thing to do. But I understand people's ADHD aspect of like current events. So, Nick, I see you chewing and stewing over there. What do you got to say about this?
I mean, I hope that Joe Biden's only chance of not going to jail is to win the presidency. So I don't think he's going to drop out, because if he wins, then he can just try and wipe it away. But if he doesn't win, I hope he goes to jail, and a lot of other people do too, because they're caught red-handed over and over again. How many times is this going to happen? I don't know. But one day, hopefully, they go to jail. Same with the banksters.
Hot take. That's a hot take. So, Chase, you're ending us off with this topic. What are your thoughts on all this stuff going on?
Damn, that take is a hot take. Well, so the email thing is bad. I don't appreciate the fact that Hunter is going around doing these international business dealings and saying, hey, if you give me 10 million bucks, you can meet my dad. And it's like, okay, well, great. Thanks for selling our soul to China. And when we get to China, that's a whole nother story. But I mean, that's honestly the biggest threat right now to the United States is China and the Chinese government. I will stand by that wholeheartedly. Like, as far as any threat goes, it is China, because we're beholden to them on every level, economically, politically, media-wise, like literally everything. And then, coronavirus is a whole nother story from that as well. Should Joe Biden step down? Perhaps. At least he should at least make a statement about it and address it. I don't know if I've seen anything from him. I don't know if he's come out and said anything about it or not. But I mean, I used to, with the DNC and the Democrats, like I used to be one. I held a Democratic position. I ran for office. I was a Bernie delegate back in the 2016 election and all that. And then I was like, oh, this is just a bunch of bullshit. Like, I got to get out of here. And what you got to remember with these parties is the Democrats back in the good old 1860s, they're the ones that wanted to keep slavery around. And so just remember that there's no such thing as the switching of the parties, quote unquote. That's just something they tell you to rebrand themselves and make it seem like, oh, that was never what we did. Just remember that. I just need everybody to remember that when we go through history and whatnot, that you got to look back at where these parties began. Freaking Andrew Jackson, man, come on, what a schmuck.
Yo, I love it. I love it. And that actually transitions into the next topic itself, because, and you hit the nail on the head in terms of really the biggest threat that America has. And, we got to think like economy wise, being the number one world superpower, just global positioning. So one of the things, just for our listeners, so just a few basic facts. There has been a whistleblower that's defected from China. She has stated that this was made in a lab, and although she has posted some papers, it's not full evidence yet, from what a lot of people say. But the one thing is they've gone after her family in China. Her family has denounced her, and those that didn't were arrested, including her mother. Now, the next thing that I really want to talk about, and which is more of one of the bigger economic global positioning things, is we saw a lot of videos coming out of China that showed the coronavirus being like people seizing down in the streets. And then you had the fact that in November, they actually started to send PPE back to China. So they sent emails out to all these big companies. Again, it's a communistic country. These businesses are all owned by the government. And they had all their staff buy PPE, send it back to the States. They were making all of our pharmaceuticals at that time. And then all of a sudden we have this crazy epidemic that just so happens to hit ground in the US as the first case, quote unquote, right when impeachment starts. I'm just curious on people's thoughts on China. We've touched a little bit on censorship with China and just kind of like the real impacts of like, I mean, really just what are your thoughts with everything going on? How do you think China is really impacting us? How do you think it's impacting the people? How do you think it's impacting our politicians? So who wants to start with that one? Let's hit it with Chase. I think you got a lot to say for this one.
All right. Here's the thing with China. And nothing that I say is about Chinese people. This is all about the ruling political party and the government of China and how America interacts with China. Okay. China. I talked about slavery earlier. We, as Americans, right now, profit off of essentially slave labor in China to build our iPhones, to build our clothes, to make computers, electronics, like literally everything. We pay people nickels a day to make stuff for us. And so what China is playing the long game right now as far as everything goes. So America cares about, oh, how's this quarter doing? How's our quarterly results? What's our fiscal year looking like? Whereas China, the greatest empire of all time, they had a rough period, okay? They had the 1900s and it kind of sucked, right? Like it was not the best. And so now China's like, you know what, let's do this. They've industrialized like crazy. And even just the past 10 years or just the 2000s alone. And then they're literally building towns that have nobody living there because they're planning to expand and they just wanted to pour some concrete and make jobs. And so they poured, I don't remember what the statistic was, but it's like more concrete in the past 10 years than the US did in all the 1900s or something like that. It's something crazy like that. I have to find the exact numbers. But then on that front, like you were saying, all the businesses in China are owned by the government. So if you are an individual and you want to enter your idea into the free market, you have a cool new product, the Chinese government, Chinese Communist Party says, you know what? That's ours now. We like that. We like that a lot. Give that to us. And then therefore you're not an individual anymore. And then if you try and say something to the government, they're going to say, nah, that's wrong. Send them to the gulag. I don't know what they have in China essentially, but send him to a hard labor camp and, maybe he'll rethink what he said. And then when COVID first broke out, the government was censoring basically anybody who was saying anything about it. Like we heard nothing from China. And then the doctor who first warned people about it died from coronavirus. Oh, how convenient. And then then there's that other lady that said it was started in a lab, which I fully believe that it's a act of biological warfare, honestly. Or you're just eating bats. I mean, both are not the best, but So when it comes to China, I feel like they're gonna try and crush us, and they got us by the balls because they own like Disney. I don't know if you guys watch South Park at all, but all the Disney stuff about how Disney is beholden to China, that's completely true. Like Disney censors the shit out of themselves for China. Like I said earlier, the NBA, and then Hong Kong. I mean, Hong Kong is a sovereign nation that China has just never recognized as a sovereign nation. Same as Taiwan. Like all three of those are still China. They're all their own places, their own countries, their own city states or whatever. And China's like, nah, that you're still part of us, and they won't even let them secede from their nation. So I could go on and on about that. I could do a full panel on all this, but China government, bad, big threat. Stay tuned. Watch out.
And that was actually right on time. I didn't have the ended the self, but that was brilliant. And I think there's something to recognize, just brief interjection, that 50% of our media is currently owned by China. Because again, we only have 5 companies that run all of our media. And we also have to think about all the lobbying and the political connections. And I want people to kind of think in terms of their responses coming up. the fact that the Trump administration has really kind of combated China's role with like kind of like the North American deal taking away from the TPP, which a lot of us Bernie supporters originally, we know that that was a shitty deal. So we're just gonna kind of slide down the panel. So Nick, you're up. What are your thoughts on China, on the CCP?
Yeah, in response to Chase, I agree with what you're saying about like they have a lot of power with like especially like in the trade relationship between us. And so that's why I don't think that they'll be like that they'll just fall away and that there will be like a war where they end up getting destroyed. So, but before I get to that, you were talking about the concrete. They built massive freeways to nowhere in cities that where no one lives in them, cities. And so to me, that's a waste. Like the nature is going to destroy that pretty quick, and then it's a waste. So, but maybe not. Maybe they built it right. I don't know. But then, yeah, about war with China. If more evidence comes out about that the Uyghur Muslim situation is a Holocaust situation, then there will be a war with China unless, well, what I think is going to happen is there'll be an internal war. Like the people, there'll be a civil war, and maybe they'll segment China into 5 different states or something. I don't know. But there will be some type of war if more information comes out about the Uyghurs. And if it's like a genocide, then something must be done.
Dude, no, I like that. I think that was very interesting points on that. Elijah, why don't you hit us off with some China thoughts?
Yeah, well, that was new information to me. So about the Holocaust situation and the potential looming war there. So I guess I'll leave that alone because I don't want to talk to something that I'm not knowledgeable about. But I studied engineering, and the reason why I studied engineering was to help with the problem of sustainability. And for whatever you believe about climate change, it doesn't really matter. We can agree that climate does change, and you just ideally don't want that many pollutants in the air, excess pollutants that you're creating, and also it's in the long run cheaper. So in that field, China is just outpacing us, and again, that's really good information to hear, and I'll have to look into that about the collapse from within. But to the point of the infrastructure push that they're making, a lot of it's also green energy. It's new technologies. They're not just making these coal-powered power plants. These are things technologies that they're installing in their infrastructure that will give them sustainability. And to another point about their trade power, as a personal experience living in Portland, we ship our trash and recycling, a lot of it, to China. And I think it was a year ago where they stopped taking it. So the trash wasn't getting picked up. And, there was this whole thing in Portland about, we're basically screwed if they don't start taking back the trash. And I'm pretty sure it was a portion of the recycling. And man, I don't know exactly what happened there, but they have leverage and they use it, because they take our e-waste for sure. They take waste that we throw away, iPhones, and you can't just throw that in a landfill. So they take that and just throw it in their landfills. And yeah, so I think the situation, and it makes sense why there would be top government officials that are embedded with them, because if they have that much power, why would you not try to buddy up with them? It's not right, but it's not really surprising when that stuff comes out, So, I guess not a whole lot more to add there, but I will want to look in on that information about the Holocaust situation. That's intense. Yeah.
I have some data for some people just to give the listeners some insights on the Uyghur Muslims. Now, the thing about this is the Jewish American Journal, or I'm not even sure it's the Jewish American Journal. I just think it's the Jewish Journal. But one of the things that they've compared this to directly is the Holocaust. Now, we do know that there is like over 1 million Uyghur Muslims that are essentially getting like the basic prison China treatment, and that is organ harvesting, human experimentation, forced labor. There's that report that came out that it's like 83 companies from like Nike, Adidas, Abercrombie and Fitch, like all these other major, like obviously like Apple, Nintendo, those bigger like I guess you'd say like the higher upper elites, any pretty much big company you can name, they're legitimately using slave labor right now. And that's something that people really need to understand. It's a huge thing. I remember posting about this a few years ago from a woman who escaped, and they took her 3 children away and returned 2 of them. They had been given a bunch of shots. One of them had died. They wouldn't tell her what happened. And she ended up getting out at the cost of her husband essentially trading places with her and her kids. And he was never found again. So I think this is something to really understand that, I think when we come to the concept of like mainstream media propaganda and manipulation, it's really unfortunate and discouraging for me, as it's like I'm African American, Native American, Jewish American, and for our media to push the whole like concentration camp aspect with people who came here at the border, like willingly came here, chose to come here, and pushed concentration camps for 2 weeks, like 2 weeks plus, in the media, blasting it everywhere, and for them to not have a peep about this, like actual concentration camps and genocide going on right now in the media, is like really infuriating for me. So for our listeners, again, like I posted that in the stream chat, so you can check out all the links and the articles on that. And I guess that actually does kind of transition. It transitions us into like the next topic on all this different stuff. We want to kind of like let things kind of relax and come back to America. So I'm very curious, like Elijah, you're in the heart of, you're like in Portland right now. So you've been down there, you've experienced in terms of your city rioting for like 130 days now or some stuff straight. Like you got the crowd. So the topic really now that we're going to switch into is the Black Lives Matter. And I myself personally want to make a distinction for what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about like the Black Lives Matter as a theme and an understanding, because obviously like Black Lives Matter, but I'm personally mixed. So I know all of our lives matter. We shouldn't be having Americans getting killed for crazy reasons. But I'm very curious of your guys' thoughts on the organization that's kind of really running a lot of these different protests that have been turning into riots. And I have some data to talk about in a little bit, but I just want to get people's thoughts. So who wants to start with the BLM? What are your thoughts on the organization? Zach, you already unmuted yourself, so let's take it away.
So I'm going to go off on a limb here and say, before we start this topic, I think we need to really decipher that there are 2 arguments. There's the Black Lives Matter organization, there's the Antifa group, and then there's the social movement itself. I think, Peter, we've had many talks about it. I'm not coming after you, but I am heavily of the belief that the All Lives Matter slogan is in a way a counter protest to what is happening, what we're seeing socially. I'll quote Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, riots are the language of the unheard, and I'm not an advocate of blind rage or destruction. I think the statues coming down, I think small business owners getting their shops broken into, I think, the egregious amount of police shootings we've seen are disgusting. However, all that to say, the Black Lives Matter movement is what happens when we have a marginalized group of people who are systematically oppressed, who have their voices and their complaints disregarded. I think it all comes back to education, which you'll hear me say over and over again. However, regarding the movement, I think it's important to understand that there are people who are peacefully protesting, and there are people who are using their voice for justice to bring awareness to the systemic issues that we see today. And for those people, I'm proud of them, and I'm an advocate for it. I march for Black Lives Matter. I'm also mixed, and it's an emotional topic to hear about, and I don't want it to get kind of swept under the rug, that there are 3 aspects to it that we need to think and talk about. So with that, I'm open to any other opinions or any other viewpoints.
I love it. No, I think that's an amazing point. So who wants to follow up? Take it away. Chase, why not? Or no, Nick? Yeah, no, Nick, you can go. You got the hand raised.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Zach, for sure. So in regards to the 3 topics or the 3 different categories, the one that you called the movement, I think that 95% of America is on board with the Black Lives Matter, the movement. But then the problem with the organization and the problem with Antifa, the organization, that I feel like is that they don't have leaders with faces that like show themselves and like say, I am the leader of Black Lives Matter. Like I'm the top 5 leaders. Maybe they do, but they need to be, those people need to be heard, and they need to be like, it's the problem is that they're just disjointed. Like they have 100 people here and 100 people there, and they might be completely different on what they feel like they should do tonight for their Black Lives Matter protest. And that's the problem. Yeah, and then last thing I want to say is Martin Luther King said that he wants people to be judged on the content of their character, and the problem with Black Lives Matter is it's like, is being Black a character? I don't think it is. So Black Lives Matter is inherently judging people on, they're saying, oh, you know, it's inherently judging people on their skin, and MLK wasn't about that. So
I like it. No, I think these are great points. Zach, what's your rebuttal? Clearly you got something. Get it.
I want to let Chase and Elijah go if you have anything else to say, because I have a lot to talk about. So if you have something to contribute, I want to give you a chance to open it up. If not, then I'll come back.
Yeah, Elijah, let's get the little points in there before we.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with the leaders aspect. And as you said, I live in Portland. I've never marched or protested. I was very close. And then I watched I guess you would say, commentary or thought argument, which was posted by Sam Harris, which I would really encourage everyone to watch if you have the, sort of the capacity to do that. It's very long, but it's thought out and well done. But the leader aspect is very key, because we would watch the protests on Twitch, and even had some friends that went down and said that there was a lot of infighting. A lot of people within the Black Lives Matter organization, maybe not the organization itself, because I don't actually know who the organization is, and maybe that's part of the problem. But the people that were down at the Portland protests were fighting amongst themselves, and as to what the message should be, what they should be doing. And maybe it just takes some time to figure that out. But as far as I know, there hasn't been a figurehead that has stepped up and led the people. That is an issue in my mind. To the second point, in an idyllic world, no, being Black is not the character. But to the systematic oppression point, and this is my opinion, is that it's not as active as a lot of the left would have you believe it is. But my personal opinion is that we're dealing with the repercussions of systematic oppression. So when they're saying Black Lives Matter, and this goes for any, someone wearing a Trump hat, make America great again, I think it's important to try and understand why someone is feeling that way and why they feel it necessary to go out and be vocal about it. And as a personal experience, I have family that lives in LA who they have had more unfortunate circumstances than I have. And they have, had troubles with gangs. They've had troubles with drugs and police, of course, and being in jail. And we're the same race, same family. My parents just happened to move and put me in a position to where I didn't have to deal with that circumstance. And I think we just have to think more about, maybe the message isn't so, like, I don't know, it's a very complicated topic, but what I'm trying to say is that opportunity is not always the same. And, if you're struggling in the ghetto for your whole life, maybe you do think that cops hate you, maybe you do think the system's against you, because in many ways it is. So not everyone's given the same tools to advance in life.
Ooh, perfect timing. I just want to interject really quick before I give Zach back the floor, because I often hear this in these types of discussions. People want to drop stats. So I will, in that sake, kind of be like the instigator in this sense, where you have 328 million people in America. 41.4 million people are Black people, which is 12.6 of the population. But in terms of the crime rate in violent crime specifically, Black people consist of more than 50% of the violent crime. Now, 9 unarmed Black men were killed by police last year, which equates to about 0.00000022%. And again, those are unarmed Black men killed by police, which obviously is, about, it's less than 1% of all Black homicides are unarmed police shootings. Now, police officers are also 18 and a half times more likely to be killed by a Black man. And since 2015, Black deaths under police custody are down 23%. Now, 93% of all Black homicides are committed by Black Americans. Now, I just personally want to say stuff in terms of the economic aspect. I think it's a huge thing that people really don't understand, that does make an impact for people. It's like that beautiful game that we've played with. I know I've used this with kids, and I've seen it done all the time, where it's, you have people start a race, right? Oh, if you have 2 parents in your home, you have this, you have this, you have this, you have this, and by the end of it, you kind of narrow it down, like, oh, one of your parents is in jail, your dad's there, he's not around. Like, you can just see that there's actual differences in who's closer to the finish line before the race even starts. So this is one concept where I just want people to kind of think about. And when they hear these numbers, it's not meant to like battle anyone on this stuff, but when we think about what the protests are now representing, how I see it, I just want to drop this point before we move on. I see this whole movement giving us it had an opportunistic moment. Like, we could have really banded together, because everyone, when we saw George Floyd happen, everyone was like, this is messed up. Left, right, Black, white, Asian, doesn't matter what color or creed or whatever you believed in. When everyone saw this, we all knew it was wrong. But it got hijacked, and it turned into like a building community and building, solidarity, to a straight up riot shit show. And that first night of riots, someone died. Like, they burned a building down and someone was inside. So I want to give the floor back to Zach, or unless Chase, you want to talk on something before we head it back, or Nick. We'll go Chase, then Nick, real quick.
I mean, my thing with the whole thing is, as a white man, at this point, I have to stand in solidarity. That's what I can do. I have to be there the best that I can to support the movement itself. The organization is a separate story, but the movement itself, of course, Black Lives Matter. Like, if you don't think Black people are important, you're a racist piece of shit. Like, come on. But the thing is, like Peter was saying, America has systemically been racist towards Black people and oppressed them for centuries. I mean, it all started with them not even being people in the 1800s when they were slaves. They were property at that point. That's what you have to remember. If you were Black or from Africa, you were not a person, you were property, and that is fucked up. And so, okay, that gives you only 150 years of actually being a person, right, in America. And then from there, there's obviously lasting tension from the Civil War and all those generations and everything that learned those behavior, that it's okay to be racist or not treat Black people as equals. And so then that finally shaves off. Now you're at like 1900. At this point, women didn't even have the right to vote either. So if you're a Black woman, you're already screwed from that. And then segregation's still a thing. You have to drink out of a separate water fountain. You got to go to a separate store. You can't do all the same stuff that white people can. And then you have to fight for an equal right to just go to public school. Public school already sucks ass. Just send everybody to the same public school. Like, come on. And then with Reagan, you introduce crack, and then you introduce the war on drugs, and then you start taking rights away and forcing people into the ghettos, and then you make smoking weed or doing a little bit of crack. Like, I don't think anybody should do crack. I wouldn't advise it, but I don't think you should go to prison for your life because you smoked a little crack. Like, and then you do that, you take the father out of the home, and then you got these moms that are now in poverty because they only have one income, because back during World War II, they forced two incomes. That was a whole ploy too. Now you got two workers in the household, and they doubled your workforce. But then the kids can't keep up. And so that's what it's come down to, is this is an economic warfare. It was a race war turned into economic warfare that we still see to this day, and it's finally coming to a head, and that's what we're seeing. So yes, of course, Black Lives Matter. Like, that's the thing, but we have to figure out why it is to the point that we've gotten to that what we're seeing. So the rest of the time, we go to Zach.
Sorry, I just want to chime in, and then I'll let you go, Nick, at one point. So, in regards to diplomacy, I think you all have really valid points. I want to bring up the fact that when we talk about segregation and we talk about property, I think that's a great point, Chase. I have a little bit of advantage in the topic because I'm studying education policy. I want to point out that when we look at historically our country's attitude towards Black people, Brown versus the Board of Education, which was the case that desegregated schools, was in 1954. That's when the verdict came out, and the country was in hell because of it. There is a lot of studies that point to the fact that we are still racially segregated and that schools are now property. When we look at the amount of Black people who live in low-income schools, who have our Constitution guarantees us a free and a public appropriate education, and that is so debatable based on where you live, the schools you go to, the education you get. Peter, you brought up a lot of facts about, Black people only represent 12% of the country. And we can talk about this because it's a long conversation, but it goes back to where you live and how you're brought up and the education you were given and the school zones you're brought in, your community. These are all systemic issues that have, and I'm glad we're all educated enough to talk about them here, but a lot of people don't know. And that all feeds into the Black Lives Matter movement. People like to say, oh, schools aren't segregated anymore. But if you look at test scores, inequality, and the rate of Blacks graduating versus whites, it's a different story. So Black Lives Matter is 60 years up and coming of inequality. And I think it's none of us, being mixed, I'm mixed, Peter's mixed, you all progressive people in this chat can really say how it affects or doesn't affect historically. Cool. That's all I got.
Hey, great insights. No, I love it. Real quick, I just want to mention too that it's important to understand that, for the listeners, again, if you're just chiming in on this stuff, we're talking about like the actual, the purpose of Black Lives Matter. Like, we all understand that there are injustices and institutionalized aspects and systemic problems within our society that haven't been fixed. And it's pretty interesting thus far, just to chime in, that none of us seem to be really down with the organization that's kind of, as I see, capitalizing on this, because we got to think they've raised like over $1 billion, and there's so many different programs that can go to like funding Black communities than just this blanket program that hasn't done a community cleanup, that hasn't done any type of like real scholarship programs. Like, they have so much money that's the Act Blue scandal is its own thing, but there's a huge difference with what we're talking about here, and I think it's important that it's getting to the forefront of people's minds. But I'll touch back in on my points with the organization itself in just a second. Nick, why don't you hit us off?
Okay, I just wanted to kind of to argue against myself and like to kind of bridge the gap between Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. Like, I understand that, and we all understand that you can kind of tell if someone is a large percentage African descendant, right? Like, it's not something that you can hide. So like with the Martin Luther King reference that I was saying about character and skin color, it's like there's just a reality that you can't hide. And the point of Black Lives Matter is they're saying that, okay, there's this system and these cops that are killing these people who look a certain way. And so Black Lives Matter, the name was like to say, we're calling, we're putting the spotlight on this thing, right? And I agree with that. And I think that it was properly titled at first. But there comes a point where I think it would be better if Black Lives Matter said, okay, we're going to morph into, because it should stay Black Lives Matter, the name, until the whole, like 95% of our culture agrees with the movement. And I think we are there. We all agree with that Black people can be treated equally as everyone and should be treated equally under the law. I think 95+% of Americans believe that. So if that wasn't the case, then yeah, I would think that they should keep the name. But since it's not the case, I think they should say, okay, we're going to morph to All Lives Matter, and then they can lead on like Asians not getting into Harvard. Black Lives Matter All Lives Matter could step in and say, we're going to look at this issue now. And they could like police racism for everybody and be All Lives Matter. And we wouldn't forget that it started with Black Lives Matter. We would not forget that.
Feel you. So I just want to touch base. I think one of the reasons why a lot of the BLM aspect gets kind of washed in with the organization is because like the 3 leaders that run it, or 4 leaders that run the like Black Lives Matter organization, which we talked about the leaders aspect, it's kind of one of those messed up parts. They've all come out and said that they're trained Marxists. The people who train them are like domestic. Literally, I'm not, and this is not joking or anything like that. These links are posted in the chat for listeners. You can look into it yourself. The leaders that trained the leaders of the Black Lives Matter organization are like literally have been tried, and I guess you would say they were found guilty for domestic terrorism. Then there's the whole like money scandal and the lack of aspects of what they're doing with the funds. And one of the reasons why I'm touching up on this stuff is because there's actually the Blexit movement is talking about exactly everything that you're talking about, Nick, and everything that you're talking about, Zach, in terms of trying to like bring these institutionalized reform changes. And it's actually been really interesting because I'm posting that one right now into the chat. But in terms of the community changes, the criminal reform stuff to really get rid of the segregation, to have different types of school choice and accessibility for kids, these are actually things that are being kind of, I guess you'd say, like spearheaded by the Blexit movement, which for those of you that don't know, it's essentially all the Democratic Black people being like, you don't just own our vote because we're Black. Like, and that's pretty much the basis of the ideology. It's trying to create your own path. So you've seen a lot of people become independents. You've also seen a lot of people, more notably like Candace Owens, become Republicans. So that's just kind of like the more popular aspect of what people know. But in tandem with that, there's also the walk away movement, which is very similar to that. We've had millions and millions and millions of people leave the Democratic parties because they've seen this kind of lack of action in these really pivotal areas that need to change. Because again, let's remember that one of the most critical and crucial crime bills that went against not just Black people, but poor people in general. I just want to again clarify that yes, Black people are very more often than not the ones at the tail end of this problem, but it's poor people. Like it's poor people in this country are really just not cared about at all. And the fact that it's been systematically designed to be certain Black areas, drop some knowledge, like US government bombed Black communities. The Klan destroyed, like the Black Harlem and the Harlem Renaissance. So there's been a lot of different aspects of the Black community that's actually been thriving and been squashed down systematically. But again, it comes back to this point with the 94 crime bill, which was Bill Clinton passed, and this is where you had, and again, I try to stay neutral, but this is where you had people like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden on the floor calling Black people predators and that they needed to be locked up. So it's really important to kind of recognize that we have this systematic aspect that's really been forced upon people that are going through mental health issues, that are going through substance abuse, that are going through these very real issues. And this does transition into the next topic, which is, I already know Zach's amped for it. It's education. Because I think, again, we've talked about this numerous times, education is really how we fix a lot of these problems. It's how you get kids to not join the Antifa groups and be a radical person. It's how you really level up and create something with your life. It's how you build compassion. So in terms of education, there's a few points I want to get into. Now, the first one to kind of bridge the gap is going to be critical race theory. It's a hot topic nowadays, and I feel like a lot of people don't really know about it. And I guess, is this something that you want to lead, Zach? You want to kind of take us off with this?
Yeah, I can start with critical race theory. Critical race theory, if you don't know, is Colleen Capper wrote a very interesting article. And I think there's two kind of aspects of critical race theory, or they've become two aspects of critical race theory. It ideally and originally started off as kind of a introspective, what is my privilege? I don't know if you've heard of the white knapsack, how you were born, the schools you go to, kind of some of the ways that we all live our individual lives. And you know what I found interesting recently, I forget what the bill was called. I'm sure Peter can help me back me up, but Trump has attempted or maybe even banned critical race theory to be taught in schools, which I am on the fence about. I think if it's not taught correctly, it can be extremely detrimental. All that to say, critical race theory is a very, very introspective, intrinsic kind of look at yourself and how what your ideologies are, your perspective, and your lens on the world. No matter how much we sit here and debate, the color of your skin will dictate so much about how you are born in society. If it's through education, if it's through the opportunities you're given, if it's through opportunities you're not given, critical race theory really helps us understand how that plays out in our culture and our world. I'm gonna leave it there, and I can follow up, Peter, if you have anything else to say, if anyone else has any other comments.
Yeah, I think one thing to get the conversation flowing is, in terms of critical race theory, it's really, I dropped that link in the video description or in the comment section for all of you listeners. But Dr. Wyatt T. Walker, who is essentially the man that was known as essentially MLK's rock during the civil rights movement. Funny enough, he was actually kind of against critical race theory in a lot of different ways, because it comes back to that kind of character above all else point. But the one thing that needs to be understood is that the intentions of critical race theory are not what we have seen being implemented. Critical race theory is, again, that kind of introspective aspect to kind of look at, it's essentially supposed to be used as a tool to build compassion and understanding, to really recognize that we all come from different walks of life, but how it's been implemented is this kind of white guilt. And it's a lot of this 1660, whatever it is, type of ideology where it's America started with slavery in the 1600s. We're not 1776. And it's really kind of devolved into trying to get people to, honestly, it's kind of reverted back to segregation type of stuff. It's pushing, I recently saw an article about this. It's trying to push faux ebonics. It's not even ebonics, which is a legitimate, its own linguistic study in its own language in its sense, but they're trying to push a lot of actual, what I've observed is racist type of talk. And it's really one of those propaganda tools that was used in slavery and when slavery ended to get people to still hate Black people and really animalize and victimize white people in a lot of ways and make Black people seem lesser and they're really just like monkeys. So one of the things that is critical race theory, there's its own educational component, but how it's getting implemented is an agenda-driven, racist-driven ideology with how I see it, because they're teaching white guilt. They're trying to have people hate themselves for your color of your skin. And it's essentially, which is really funny to me because it's almost egotistical. It's white saviorism. You have to be the ones that help the Black people because they can't help themselves. And there's been so much BS about it. And again, it comes back to the point where it's essentially trying to slander the American Constitution. And and not honor the fact of what we've gone through to really learn from it and never repeat it, but essentially try to scrub it from your minds and flip it. So that's just my thoughts on it, how I've seen it getting implemented. Who wants to dive into that one?
Yeah, this is the first time I've heard of critical race theory specifically, but some of the points you touched on, specifically the white guilt, bring up a lot of experiences for me in trying to wade through this whole current political climate that we find ourselves in today, specifically with white friends of mine who are telling me that they're racist, but where I have to very carefully tell them that they're not, in my opinion, and that this word racist is being thrown around. Like, okay, for instance, walking into a park and being surrounded by black people when you're white and feeling uncomfortable is totally different than feeling like the Jews are a problem and you got to round them up, throw them in cages and gas them. All right, they're just two totally different things. And to say that they're the same and use the same word for that is so damaging to everyone, but specifically on the white guilt point, to people calling themselves racist, believing that they're racist and that they have to make some sort of amends for it, which in a way everyone does, but we're all stuck in this situation of the effects of this systematic oppression that's happened. And again, to me, it all just comes back to, really education. And I hate to kind of diverge from the specific topic you brought up, but it's more so of the providing of the critical resources of education that help all poor kids of any color stay off the streets, stay out of gangs, stay off drugs, or get into drugs if they want to, but give them the tools to explore properly and correctly and safely, and have a support system, have a community that's not based around violence and causing criminal activity and hurting people. These are all things that when a kid is missing a community and a support system, specifically of their parental, of a father, of a mother, they're going to try and fill those holes. And a lot of times, if you're poor, you're in an area where there's gangs, there's drugs, there's crime, and those are how you fill those holes. You're trying to find a way to fulfill these gaps in your persona and in your humanity. And if that is the root of the issue in my mind, and stopping it at race and who's being persecuted more because of their color, it's like, well, why though? And why is that happening? Where did it start? And how can we fix that? That's all I got.
No, I think it's a beautiful point. I mean, again, like I see the stuff that we see at the surface is just that. Like, there's a lot more deeper rooted issues to all these things, and as I like to see it, it's a lot of the divide and conquer tactics. So before we jump back, because I know Zach got some papers, I know he's got something to read. I just want to see if Nick and Chase have anything that they want to say before we jump back to Zach.
Well, I guess in this situation, I don't really know. I guess white man bad, me feel bad, me white, me bad. We need to have an intellectual conversation about it, and like, and history. Like me, yes, I was born white. So does that inherently make me better? No. That's the thing. That's what we have to understand, is that society has placed these standards on us, and then we just kind of play into them. So me being born white or someone else being born black, the color of our skin is not what has any effect on our lives or anything, but it is the societal aspects of where were we born, what kind of community did we have, what kind of family did we have, what's our wealth, income level, and whatnot, what is our community like. And so then, I mean, that comes down to segregation and separating the neighborhoods of poor and rich and white and black, and then you kind of narrow it down from there. But yeah, I'd never heard of critical race theory until literally right now. But I think it's definitely an interesting topic to explore. And I feel like if you can't think, I mean, it's literally just critical thinking. Like it's not, I don't see a need to brand it as its own thing. It's just like literally just philosophy. Like why am I who I am? And, if you can't acknowledge who you are because of your circumstances, or other people like can't acknowledge other people's circumstances, then like get your brain going, man. Come I don't know. It's my stance on it, I guess.
No, I like it, yo. Honest take. Nick, what do you got?
On critical race theory, I mean, it just goes back to we just got to stop treating, I mean, we should not be telling kids that this is how you treat someone of a certain race. No, you treat everyone the same. It's the bad people who treat people based on their race. Period. And then just leave it at that. And more like my girlfriend is 50% white and 50% Latin American. So our kids, if we had a kid, would be a fourth Latin American. And there's going to be a lot of kids in this next generation that are a fourth this and a fourth that. And it's just going to disappear. And we have to not have critical race theory where it's or any type of racial education where it's like, this is how you, I mean, we should have racial education, but not racial education where this is how you treat someone of this type of skin color. That should never be taught. And that's all I have to say.
Yeah, I'm going to give the floor to Zach, but I just want to say that this is a perfect time to talk about the South Park episode when it's the future and everyone is the same color. Like it's what you just said, Nick. There's literally no difference in shades and everyone looks the same, but they still find something to have infighting and division about. It's like, or I think it's actually, no, I'm sorry. It's the South Park does it, but also Fairly Odd Parents does it when everyone's a blob. And it's like Timmy's in this world where everyone's a blob and it's just like, oh, you're this type of a blob. Oh, you're that type of a blob. And they all hate each other. So it's like in two different cartoons, you see the same message where it's like, it doesn't matter in terms of the race or the color. It's a deeper, more, I guess you would say, perspective focused problem that we need to really try to solve and eliminate and eradicate that aspect of division. So I know you're about to hit us up with, yeah, exactly. I mean, we're all bags of flesh. I think that's the thing to recognize is that, there's a lot more deeper things, beneath the surface, but I know Zach's got that docket. So what's the educational perspective on this if you want to enlighten the listeners?
Yeah. So I think those are all really valid points. I think the critical race theory is such a sensitive topic that it's going to trigger a lot of people no matter how you go about it. I did just write a paper on it. But I think what's really important to understand is, and the term privilege gets thrown around all the time these days, and I think it's really overplayed. None of us here have any control of how we were born or what we look like. However, when we think about critical race theory, we need to think about, in terms of education, how it impacts equity. For example, in 2020, the Federal Commission voted against the internet as a public utility access. So that means when we are looking at, and I know, Peter, we have a more topic about education, and I'll go down this road a little bit later, but when we look at critical race theory and we look at who's going to be most infected, it's going to be the kids who don't have access to internet. And critical race theory, when taught correctly, helps us understand that us being here right now, having this conversation, can be considered a privilege because, in a way, we're speaking to people, we're enhancing communication, we are putting our voices out there that may change someone else's opinion. The United States had a stat, I think there was 153 million kids across the world don't have access to internet. Most of those are in foreign countries. Again, it comes back to understanding it's very introspective. No one's blaming you for being white. No one's blaming you for being mixed, but being able to understand that you're privileged and how you go about it. And if you can act differently or think differently or change someone else's opinion based on their experiences, that's how we move forward. We've talked about it many times. The media has divided us more than ever. Politics have divided us more than ever. Being able to understand that, like, race does play race and privilege do play a problem in our society, and how we navigate that, how those conversations are big aspects. If you didn't know, the Federal Communications Commission, I said it again, vetoed public internet use in our country. That's crazy. In a time of COVID, internet has to be paid for. people are losing jobs. You know, free and appropriate public education means nothing if you can't distance learn. Critical race theory teaches us that education shouldn't be a privilege, but it is. And that's all I'll say about it.
No, yo, that was great. I love that discourse on it because again, like critical race theory is something that it's used as a really like a big hot word in a lot of the media as that hot topic, like Trump cut this, Trump cut that. But when you understand like how it's been taught is kind of like the white guilt, white saviorism, you're essentially just treating people based in a racist or prejudicial way of just judging them based on one thing and assuming everything about that person, versus this more philosophical introspective journey. I think that's something that's really important to make a distinction of. And I think it's when people start to explore that, when they see what has been getting taught of this, you'll be like, whoa, this isn't anything what we all just talked about. And that's kind of my point with that subject and topic, because in terms of education reform, we need to start teaching kids philosophy like this. I think that's one of the biggest ways we can change society within a generation, is because we already know, like, if you want to just test kids on stats, like there's been so many psychological studies that show if you teach someone philosophy at like K through 5 in those different levels, all of their other scores for like math, reading, writing, all the other like sciences and things like that, they go up like drastically because you're teaching these kids these kind of critical thinking, introspective skills, or as we know, common sense in our generation. But that's kind of like devolved. Now, this is a little bit of twist on education, because I think one thing that's important is that we need to have also, it's a different type of education reform. And the reason why I'm tying these two together is because it's defunding the police versus reforming the police. And I see the reason why I'm tying this as another form of education is because my stance, and the reason why I want to ask you guys this stuff, is that I feel that we need to really educate police better. They need to go through different types of training. I do think that they get a lot of crazy budgets that could get reformed, not defunded. But Senator Tim Scott, who was called an Uncle Tom, which, you know, people of color, you know, that's a very like kind of derogatory term that we might call each other. But he was called an Uncle Tom for trying to create a police reform bill that charged officers fully, and they were automatically placed in like an FBI database for any type of like essentially like harmful act they do to a citizen, that their branch or like what would you even call it, like their police station, their whole like district, they'd get defunded in a sense where they wouldn't get as many of like their goal, they wouldn't get as much funding if they had a like any amount of like, I guess you would say like harm or extreme measures, especially with deaths. It was one of those scale types of things, like this, the more severe the case, the more money you would lose. In addition to that, it was actually going to require at least one mental health expert per dispatch. And that's like per car of officers. And this bill got shot down at the height of like the George Floyd protests and riots because of politics. And again, like Black Senator Tim Scott, or Tim Kelly, you have to correct me on that one, guys. He was called an Uncle Tom for proposing this legislation. And again, like for me, I think that we really need to start to educate our police better. And this is one of the, and our communities in terms of what really goes on in policing. So I'm just kind of curious on your guys' thoughts on police reform versus defunding the police. Because I also posted some data just now that goes into all the different effects of police getting defunded. And I know for a lot of us in this local area of Seattle, like we had, I think they said almost like half of our police force quit. So you got to think we only have like a dozen patrol cars that are in charge of looking after like the city. So who wants to take it away with the police stuff?
Oh boy, I'll go first. I'll take this one. So what's interesting about this one for me that's changed a lot recently, and this has been a thing in my family that's been weird. And it's, I mean, so my sister is actually in the process of becoming a police officer right now. And it's really weird to me because I've always expressed my distaste for police. I mean, I don't like authority. I don't like the government. I don't like any time. I don't like, I respect people, the individuals, you know, that are the police or that are in the military as human beings, right? But like as far as what the American military does or what the American or local police do, it really depends on. I don't usually agree with what is the case and how it's approached. So, yeah, it's been very interesting just seeing the whole process because like my sister, I trust her to be a police officer. You know what I mean? Like, I know that she will do what is right to keep people safe. And I think that's the type of people that, you know, a lot of the times to be a police officer, there's the whole statistic about having to go through less training than a barber, right? So like, to the amount of training required to just simply hold a razor to someone's neck and shave their face is like double what it is to literally be able to execute somebody purposefully, intentionally. So that definitely needs to change. I think that we need a hugely demilitarized police. So when I think of defunding the police, I don't mean don't give them a salary and like, you know, entirely remove them necessarily, because there is a point where you just need guys to be like, hey, like you stole this guy's shit, like I'm taking you to the courthouse, or hey, you did this to X guy's wife, you know, you shouldn't have done that, man. Let's go to jail. But like, you don't need to be going around just shooting people or killing people. And you don't need fucking tanks. Why do you need a tank? Like, come on. Like, lots of police departments have huge SWAT vans, and like they're just literally like a mini military. And to me, that's just so excessive. Because when I think of what police should be in modern times, it's simply someone to just make sure everybody's keeping chill. Like, they're not. And the main thing with police that we need to remember too is they're not preventing crimes, they're cleaning up crimes, right? So like, if you're getting robbed, or if you're getting sexually assaulted, or like you're getting beat up, the cop's not right there to be like, whoa, stop that. Like, you have to call the police and you file a police report, and then they do their thing. So, and I think when they get like a sniff of the action, or the action comes to them, then there's the overreaction and whatnot. But at the end of the day, fuck 12.
Mic drop moment. Who wants to follow that one up? What do you got to say? I'm curious,
I'll
Nick.
go for it.
Hit it.
I mean, cops break up crimes happening at the time all the time. Like an assault happening, a cop might be there and they break it up and arrest people. Don't you think that's good? I mean, and then
I respond to that.
Yeah, you could respond. Like, let
Yeah.
Nick finish your.
yeah,
I mean, that's definitely like a one-off type deal. Like, say you're at like a Seahawks game or something, there happens to be a cop in the crowd, you might break it up. But if you're walking down some back alleyway in a sketchy part of Seattle at midnight, chances are there's not going to be a cop around to keep you safe.
yeah. But the threat that might be the case prevents a lot of crimes. So they don't just react to crimes. More police presence prevents crimes. If the criminals know that there's only 100 cops out tonight in New York City versus 20,000 or something, they know less crime happens. So
I'm gonna play devil's advocate on this one real quick, because before I'll jump to you, Elijah. Well, I will say, if for those of you that haven't gotten a chance to travel abroad, we are one of the few countries that actually doesn't have like open carry police. And you know, you go to France, you go to Italy, like their cops, they'll have like AKs strapped, like just walking around like it's normal. And I think that's something that it doesn't prevent crime. Like, they're walking around, they have tanks out on the street just posted up at the corners, but crime still goes down. And if not, some of the more like vile kind of nasty crimes. So I'm not really so sure I'm sold on the police presence like that.
well, there's corrupt police.
Yeah,
If-
definitely.
If there's corrupt police, then yeah, you don't want 20,000 corrupt police. But if they're good, and that's another thing I wanted to say is they should be purple belts in jujitsu before you can be a cop. Like, yeah.
I'm down for that. So they know
they
other
shouldn't
moves
be
and stuff like
fat
that.
and- yeah.
You're muted.
Oh, I know you got to bounce really quick, Zach. So did you want to go before Elijah, or did you want to go, Elijah?
Oh, you can go, Zach.
Oh, cool. So I saw a crazy stat. I think it was like it takes 6 months to be a police officer, and it takes almost 2 years to be like a certified special education teacher. So I'm talking like real high level special education. Regarding police reform, I don't think we need to drop numbers. I think we need to improve improve our expectations of what it takes to be police. 6 months is not enough training. I think Chase touched on it a little bit. Like, we need to be able to like depend on our city to protect our citizens, and that's not a one unit's job. It's not the police's job when there's someone's unstable, harassing somebody. Police should be there. Police do deter crime. Their presence does deter crime. To Nick's point, I don't think it's as drastic as preventing all crime. The fear of going to jail is very real, but 6 months is not enough to get out there and to think you're going to be trained to stop all crime that happens. And they have to make split-second decisions to pull out a gun. And one of my buddies is a police officer, and I don't envy him at all, because he will, no matter if you're Democratic or Republican, you're never right. Look at the Breonna Taylor case. I think that was egregious. But the facts say that like he was in the right because he feared for his life, and there was a criminal record, and it's no matter where you land, like there's no winning to be a police officer, especially now. Like, you get chastised for anything you do. There are bad police. Fuck the bad police. Increase what it takes to be a police officer. Bring in training. Have people on call. Have police there for like crimes that we need crimes for. Dispatch should be trained to ask questions or to know if this is a violent crime, send police. Not violent, send a social worker. Send someone there who can support the community.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer. Elijah, you want to take it away?
Yeah. So to the original, I guess, topic of defund the police versus reform the police, I definitely think this comes back to like language, and it's another thing that people get emotional about, and then they react to, and they hear defund the police and they think, oh, everyone wants the police gone, and that's a bad thing. So blue lives matter too. I have an uncle that's a cop. I know other cops, and I understand that reaction based off of the language that was presented. Like, why wouldn't you react to that? I do think that the actual goal that defund the police is shooting for is good, but there needs to be, again, like a language revision there, because like a lot of the things that everyone has said, I agree with. It's way too easy to become a cop, and like to Chase's point about your sister becoming a cop and you trusting her to do the right thing. It's like, I do too. I trust the same thing, but when you're in that situation of high stress, very quick reaction times, like a person doesn't know what they're going to do until they're put through that. And they're not put through that high intensity military type training for that type of situation. I'm not saying they need to be militaristic. I think they need that type of training that provides them the skills to handle their like nervous system, that only like a highly trained military personnel will receive. And they go through 6 months of training, and like Nick said, they don't know jujitsu. It's like, you're going to go to the ground. You need to know how to defend yourself at the very least. And there's no wonder why they pull for the gun or the taser, because they don't know what they're doing. And yeah, we need to reform the police. I agree with everything that's been said. I think I'm just reiterating things. And yeah, I think it's dangerous to throw around that language, though, to just like, oh, defund the police, they need to get out of there. You need to reform them before you get rid of the budget. Reform the budget, and then look at cutting it back. That's the way that I look at it.
Yeah. No, those are great. Those are all great points, guys. And I just want to, go ahead for the listeners, just say just some kind of like highlight reels of this problem with that misinterpretation or use of language. Is we've had technically 3 high-level Black officials lose their jobs because of this. And they had just gotten into these, like, essentially like head of the police force. Notably one, we have ours in Seattle. There's been another one over abroad. But we're going to wrap up here, folks. we just want to say thank you. I just do want to say this point with the police reform aspect. People need to understand that when you defund the police, every area and state and city that's defunded their police has seen a skyrocket in crime, like in terms of shootings, homicides. And with the coronavirus, we also have to understand that this is an especially bad time too, because having personal conversations with police officers, they're working overtime, they're stretched thin, they're getting forced to do these crazy shifts, working like 16-hour shifts. But you also have that concept of everyone hates them, and it's a very warring like mentality. So what we really need to do right now is understand that even with the coronavirus, they can't even arrest violent criminals because there's so many rules and stipulations with who can actually go to the crimes or go into the courthouses and prisons. And I'm fairly certain from my conversations with a few different districts or police officers from different regions, they have to have like a class B felony worthy like offense to actually be arrested and contained for more than like the 24 hours. But even then, it's really pretty much just catch and release. I know, like, the city of Linwood, city of Seattle, it's essentially a catch and release protocol. We've seen that with Portland. A lot of people not getting charged for all the acts of rioting and like arson and stuff like that. There's more, since people have gotten deputized, there's been more cases. But again, that's on a federal level. They've completely ignored what the cities are doing. So to close out, I just want to say that one of the things I just want to kind of precaution and give some wisdom to people. What we're seeing in our country right now with all of the division is very akin to communist tactics. And more notably, I posted a comment or in the section of the video is it's about a man named Manning Johnson. He was an African-American, height of, like World War, civil rights aspects. And he was essentially like a professional kind of like revolutionary. He ended up leaving these institutions, but he talks about his experience and a lot of the things that we're seeing now in terms of Antifa and like the Nazi brown shirts and how they acted in this type of trying to overthrow the government, create like massive civil discourse and division. We're on that same path. And with everything here going on in Creatives Chat, as a reminder, it's all about love. It's all about compassion. I think the one theme that we all touched on is building bridges of understanding through sharing our perspectives in a civil fashion. So I just want to say thank you to our guest. I want to say thank you to our listeners for watching and listening to us really just talk about life and some of the current events that are going on that we're all getting impacted by. And I hope that our conversation served as really just some inspiration that, we don't have to yell at each other and we can still disagree with each other. So each person on the panel is going to get one little final word before we conclude, and I'll wrap things up real quick. But Nick, why don't you start us off with the conclusions? Final words, what are your last thoughts? Pitch whatever you want to pitch, do it up.
Thank you. It's good conversation, everybody. Thank you, Peter and Rusty. I wanted to talk about Kamchatka. Have you guys heard about 95% of the marine life in Kamchatka is dead? And it's either Fukushima, which is neighboring. There's 3 cores that are apparently in the Earth's core, nuclear cores in the Earth's core, or they're dumping all this radioactive water. Google Fukushima radioactive water. They have tons of it, and they're probably dumping it for the past 10 years.
They actually announced that. Sorry to interrupt, but they actually announced that they're going to be dumping.
Yeah.
I'm looking it up right now.
They've probably already been doing it for years. But also, Russia has had a bunch of oil spills and gas spills this year. So, and there was a 7.5 earthquake in Alaska. And there was just yesterday a volcano in Kamchatka erupted. So all that has happened in like 2 weeks on my radar. And just, the Kamchatka thing is really bad. And I think it's the Black Sea, another part of Russia, there was another like thousands of dead fish just washed up. And they tested the water in Kamchatka and it's filled with gasoline.
Oh. Well, that inspires us. Who wants to close out their final statements and inspirations for the people?
I'm going to go, but thank you all for listening. If you are interested in learning about education, some of the topics I talked about today, there's a really cool book It's called Our Kids, The American Dream in Crisis by Dr. Robert Putnam. It's a really good book. I highly recommend it. There's another one called The Flat Earth and Education by Linda Harmon. Those are really good resources if you're interested or want to know more about how education needs reform. All right. Thanks for listening. Peace.
Is that
All right, Elijah, then Chase. Why don't we do it that way?
Sounds good. Yeah, this has been a pleasure. I've had very few conversations, I think, that went into this amount of depth and also stayed civil. So this has been awesome. I just, I guess, want to say to people that with the division and with all these complicated topics that, and I think we've touched upon it several times, that we just need to think deeper. They're complicated topics. Try to control the emotion aspect and think about it. And the way that I've done that over, just several years, I think, is just listening to intellectuals. And it's not like some, people aren't trying to be egotistical. It's like this is what they do. They're philosophers, essentially. People like Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, listen to some Christopher Hitchens, listen to people that dive into ideas and attack them and break them down. And, even if you don't agree with them, listen to them, because they dissect things and they're not emotional, or they try not to get emotional. Yeah. And I think it's really valuable to do things like that. So, yeah.
I love it. No, man, thank you. It was great insights. Always question your thinking. And Chase, why don't you wrap us up with your guest closing statements?
Yeah, for sure. Well, again, pleasure, everybody. Thank you guys all for having this discussion. It's been very eye-opening, and I feel like, yeah, like everybody said, I feel like everybody will come out of this better off than before, and I feel like people can learn from it, as far as how to have a civil discussion, grow your ideology. And then, yeah, like Elijah was saying, one of the best things that you can do is listen to people that you disagree with. If you don't think you hold those ideas to yourself, look into it, figure out why the other side might think that way, figure out what you can do to enhance either your beliefs and get, more understanding of the other side, or even add that perspective and maybe you change what you believe. I feel like the world that we're living in right now, a lot of people are afraid to lose, but the best thing that you can do in life at all is lose, because that's going to teach you how to win. It's going to teach you what to do better next time. That's going to teach you how to be better. And that's what it all comes down to. We just got to be better as people, be better to each other, and build a better future for ourselves. So that's what I'll leave it at for today. Thank you, guys.
No, thank you guys all. This was very insightful. Learned some new stuff. And as always, we grow through conflict. Now, learned this one from Rusty. It doesn't always have to be combative, but one of the things that, we've all learned personally is that how do we learn how to walk? How do we learn how to talk? How do we learn how to write? You fall repeatedly until you figure it out. You speak gibberish for months. You write crazy letters backwards all the time until you get it. So failure is an important part of growth. And just because there's been a lot of messed up aspects of our society doesn't mean we can't gain the wisdom to really apply that action into life to change our world. And here at Creative Chat, our biggest pitch is always, we're all one global family. We're all flying on this rock, traveling through space together. And that's really how it goes. We're in it together, and we're only as strong as our weakest link. So ride the wave of life, conquer those adversities, and spread love and light. Compassion is going to be the way we get through it. So thank you for our listeners. Russ, if you have any last closing words, why don't you take us out? If not, thanks for watching our first community panel. I guess next time we have to talk environment. We didn't even get into like child trafficking and all the pedo-related stuff going on.
Okay, I have to say, I looked up Nexium because I had no idea what that was. I looked into that today, and I'm down a fucking rabbit hole. I'm like, what the hell is this? So yeah, next time.
We got to talk about economics too. Federal Reserve.
Oh yeah, monetary
That's the biggest
changes.
problem.
Oh yeah, electronic currency, the manipulation with those in power. Like, there's so many topics we could explore. And this is a great group. I enjoyed your guys' patience with each other. I enjoyed your guys' civility. And even when there were like disagreements, it was cool. So this is, again, I hope it's a loving reminder for the listeners that what we see in TV and stuff like that, and what we're seeing with politics, that's theater. You know, it's meant to cause that emotional response and evoke that type of primal response, or I guess you'd say a primal reaction. And when you really slow things down and listen and let people chew and stew in a thought, you respond, you know, with kind of tact. You respond with grace. And this is the most important thing. And, you know, Elijah, you touched on it, and Chase, you touched on it, but we learn through entering that realm of unknown. And there's no greater way than entertaining someone's ideas that you don't have. And this is, again, you know, you hear me say, and as my, like, you know, my FSP teachings, each of us are a piece of the puzzle. And when you ignore someone else, you're missing that piece. You know, we're only born with our own perspective, and the only way we can grow and gain a bigger and broader version or an understanding and perspective of our universe and ourself is through getting those pieces that we share through these types of discourses. So again, I just want to thank you guys for being such awesome guests. Thank you for all of our listeners, and I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, thanks again.
Bye.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Have a happy always.
Oh, yeah.
That concludes this episode of Creatives Chat. Thank you for watching. Join us every Thursday at 3:33 p.m. Pacific Daily Time as creative minds get together and chat about who knows what. View more episodes on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks again to our sponsors for making this show possible.
Thanks for joining us.